In the summer of 1242, the streets of London witnessed one of the most gruesome executions in English history. William de Marisco was not merely killed, he was systematically dismembered while still alive. His body was torn apart piece by piece as crowds looked on, caught between fascination and horror. This was far more than a punishment. It was a deliberate display of royal terror, crafted to send a message that would reverberate through the centuries. The story of William de Marisco is more than an account of medieval brutality. It is the tale of how power consolidates itself through fear and how the defiance of a single man led to the establishment of England's most infamous form of capital punishment. The events of that July day would set the precedent for hanging, drawing, and quartering, a sentence so savage that even its mere mention instilled fear in potential rebels for generations. William was born into a family already shadowed by suspicion and allegations of treachery. The de Marisco name carried the stain of piracy and betrayal, making William a natural target in the ruthless political environment of 13th century England. His family's defiance of royal authority had marked them for persecution, and William would ultimately pay the price not only for his own alleged transgressions, but also for the perceived sins of his ancestors. In the medieval world, loyalty to the crown was synonymous with survival, and betrayal did not just bring death, it brought a death so horrific it became a warning to all. Kings like Henry III ruled through a balance of reward and terror, and when that balance was threatened, the response was swift, public, and unmistakably brutal. William's downfall began in 1238. King Henry III had narrowly survived what appeared to be an assassination attempt, and suspicion immediately fell on those already viewed as enemies of the crown. William, with his family's tainted reputation and his own questionable activities, became the prime suspect in what royal chroniclers described as a plot against the king's life. Whether William truly conspired against Henry III remains historically uncertain. Medieval accusations of treason were often politically motivated, a convenient tool to eliminate inconvenient figures or seize their lands. What mattered was not guilt or innocence, but the perceived threat to royal authority. In William's case, his family history made him the perfect scapegoat for an event that may have had entirely different origins. The accusation alone was enough to destroy William's life. Medieval justice functioned on the principle that being accused by royal authority was tantamount to guilt, especially for those already living under suspicion. William faced a stark choice familiar to countless men of his time: submit to almost certain execution or flee and become an outlaw. He chose rebellion, setting himself on a path that would culminate in one of the most savage punishments in English history. Declared an enemy of the realm, William escaped to Lundy Island, a rocky outcrop in the Bristol Channel. This island became both his fortress and his prison. From this strategic position, William launched a campaign of piracy and resistance that made him one of England's most wanted men, laying the groundwork for the brutal retribution that awaited him. Lundy Island offered ideal conditions for his rebellion. Its location allowed him to intercept merchant vessels and harass royal ships with relative impunity. From this stronghold, William transformed from accused traitor into active pirate, making his offenses against the crown undeniably real. For 4 years, William de Marisco elevated piracy into a calculated art form. His ships struck English merchant vessels with devastating precision, seizing cargo, capturing ships, and building a reputation as one of the most successful pirates in English waters. Each raid not only enriched William and his followers, but also humiliated the crown, exposing the limits of royal authority. The psychological effect of his piracy was profound. Every vessel captured and every royal ship harassed served as a visible demonstration that King Henry III could not fully protect England's commerce. This erosion of royal prestige was perhaps more damaging than the material losses themselves, as it inspired others to believe resistance was possible. William's campaign created a dilemma for the crown. Ignoring his actions would signal weakness, potentially encouraging further rebellion. Yet capturing him was no simple task. Lundy Island's natural defenses rendered direct assaults nearly impossible. The crown needed a strategy that would not only end William's piracy but also restore royal authority through a display of overwhelming power. Despite numerous attempts, William remained untouchable. The island's rocky shores and treacherous waters offered him unmatched protection. By choosing this stronghold, William turned geography into his greatest ally, demonstrating that even the might of the English crown could be challenged by ingenuity, audacity, and strategic advantage. The years of William de Marisco's successful resistance only amplified his notoriety and hardened the crown's determination to capture him. Every failed attempt to dislodge him from Lundy Island became yet another embarrassment for royal authority. Stories of the pirate who openly defied the king spread throughout England, each tale reinforcing William's image as a living challenge to the very notion of royal supremacy. For King Henry III, William's capture was no longer just desirable. It had become essential to preserve the credibility and authority of the crown. The cat-and-mouse game between William and royal forces became legendary. Tales of his daring raids, cunning escapes, and audacious maneuvers passed from tavern to marketplace, turning a pirate into a symbol of resistance. William was no longer merely a criminal. He had become a folk hero representing defiance against royal oppression. This burgeoning legend made his eventual capture crucial. If William remained free, others could be emboldened to question the crown, potentially sparking wider unrest. The psychological battle between William and the crown reached its peak as royal commanders realized that conventional military strategies would not suffice against the elusive pirate. Capturing him would require a combination of force, cunning, and perhaps betrayal. A confrontation was looming that would end not only William's rebellion but also define the limits of royal power, and it would do so in a fashion designed to terrify all who witnessed it. By 1242, William de Marisco's 4-year run of piracy and defiance was about to meet its end. The exact details of his capture remain partially obscure, but contemporary chronicles indicate that betrayal played a key role. Some accounts suggest that one of William's own followers deceived him, lured by promises of safety, while others claim that overwhelming royal forces finally executed a carefully planned assault on Lundy Island. Whatever the circumstances, the result was inevitable. The man who had humiliated English authority for years was finally in chains, destined for London and a fate remembered for its extraordinary cruelty. The capture of William de Marisco was celebrated as a triumph not only over a pirate, but also over the concept of rebellion itself. King Henry III and his advisors understood that this punishment would serve multiple purposes: to exact revenge, deter future uprisings, and display the formidable reach of royal justice. A standard execution could never satisfy these requirements for someone of William's notoriety. As William was transported to London in chains, news of his capture spread quickly. The man who had once inspired whispers of admiration for his audacity was now being cast as an example of royal retribution. The public, who had long followed tales of his exploits, would soon witness the brutal reality of challenging the crown, learning a lesson about the limits of defiance. When William finally faced royal justice, the accusations against him went far beyond piracy. He was charged with treason against the king, rebellion against royal authority, and conspiracy to commit regicide. These charges were as much political theater as legal matters, designed to rationalize the extraordinary punishment that awaited him. In medieval society, treason was considered the most egregious of crimes, striking directly at the foundation of political order. Kings, believed to derive authority from God, considered rebellion not only a crime against the crown, but an affront to divine will. William's alleged conspiracy against Henry III thus became an assault on the sacred institution of kingship itself. The trial was more spectacle than justice. Medieval legal practices in cases of treason assumed royal infallibility. An accusation by the king carried the weight of divine judgment and required little corroboration. William's fate was essentially sealed before he even reached London. The proceedings were a formality, providing a veneer of legality for the horrors to come. The charges also retroactively justified his years of piracy. By framing his actions as part of a broader conspiracy against the crown, royal propagandists transformed William from a skilled pirate into a traitorous villain, painting every act of resistance as motivated by hatred of legitimate authority. This narrative was crucial to maintaining public support for the extreme punishment Henry III had meticulously planned. By July 1242, London was abuzz with anticipation. Word had spread that William de Marisco's execution would not be ordinary. It was intended as a public spectacle to demonstrate the full might of royal vengeance. The method chosen, hanging, drawing, and quartering, was relatively new to England, and so extreme that even the mere description inspired terror among would-be rebels. The procedure was carefully designed to maximize both suffering and public impact. William would first be dragged through the streets behind horses, a humiliation intended to demonstrate the king's power and ensure that news of the punishment spread across the city. This preliminary torture served symbolic and practical purposes. It physically weakened the condemned while reinforcing the visual lesson of royal authority. Next, William would be hanged until near death, but deliberately cut down while still conscious. This balance between life and death required precision, ensuring that he would endure the full horror of what was to follow. The executioner's skill was in bringing the condemned to the edge of death without allowing escape into unconsciousness, a cruel demonstration of control over life itself. The final stage was the most gruesome. William would be disemboweled while still alive, his entrails burned before him, and then his body dismembered into 4 parts. Every step was calculated for maximum suffering and maximum spectacle. The public would witness not only the physical torment of a man who defied the king, but also a vivid illustration of the consequences of rebellion. Through this calculated display, Henry III sought to reinforce a lesson for all England. Defiance of royal authority, no matter how clever or successful, would ultimately meet with unmatched vengeance. William de Marisco's legend of daring rebellion would be extinguished, replaced by a cautionary tale of fear, punishment, and the absolute power of the crown. The entire process was meticulously choreographed to create a memory so vivid and terrifying that it would haunt witnesses for the rest of their lives. On that fateful July morning in 1242, William de Marisco was dragged from his prison cell to begin his final journey through the streets of London. Tied behind horses, his battered body was pulled over the rough cobblestones as crowds gathered to witness the spectacle. The sound of his flesh scraping against stone mixed with the jeers and curses of onlookers who had been taught to view treason as the ultimate evil. The crowds that lined the streets represented a cross-section of medieval London society. Nobles and commoners alike had come to witness the destruction of the man who had defied royal authority for so long. Their presence served multiple purposes. They were witnesses to royal justice, participants in a communal act of loyalty to the crown, and observers learning what happened to those who challenged royal power. As William's broken body was dragged through London's narrow streets, the symbolism was unmistakable. The man who had once sailed freely through English waters, striking at royal ships with impunity, was now helpless and humiliated, completely at the mercy of the authority he had dared to oppose. The stark contrast between his former freedom and present degradation was precisely what Henry III intended the public to witness and remember. The physical suffering of the dragging was only the beginning of William's ordeal, but it served a crucial purpose in the overall spectacle. By the time he reached the place of execution, his body would already be shattered and bleeding, making him appear less like a defiant rebel and more like a helpless victim. This transformation was essential to the psychological impact of the punishment, ensuring the crowd fully grasped the power of royal authority. The gallows where William de Marisco would meet his end had been specially constructed for this execution. Unlike the simple wooden structures used for common criminals, this scaffold was designed to accommodate the complex requirements of hanging, drawing, and quartering. Every detail had been meticulously planned to maximize both the victim's suffering and the spectacle's impact on watching crowds. When William was finally lifted onto the scaffold, barely conscious from the ordeal of being dragged through the streets, the crowd fell silent in anticipation of what would follow. The executioner, skilled in the precise art of controlled death, prepared to demonstrate his craft on one of the most notorious criminals in English history. The rope was placed around William's neck with ceremonial precision, signaling the beginning of his final agony. The hanging process was carefully controlled to bring William to the very edge of death without allowing him to slip into unconsciousness. Medieval executioners took pride in their ability to gauge exactly how long a victim could hang before irreversible damage occurred. This skill was essential to the punishment's effectiveness, as the subsequent stages required the victim to remain conscious and fully aware. As William's body was cut down from the gallows, still breathing but barely alive, the crowd pressed forward to witness the next stage of his destruction. The executioner's assistants held his broken body steady as preparations were made for the disembowelment that would follow. Every movement was deliberate, designed to prolong suffering while maintaining the theatrical nature of the spectacle. The disembowelment of William de Marisco, while still alive, represents one of the most horrifying moments in the history of English justice. Using razor-sharp knives, the executioner opened William's abdomen and carefully extracted his entrails, ensuring he remained conscious to witness his own destruction. The skill required for this procedure was considerable, as the goal was maximum suffering without causing immediate death. Contemporary chronicles record that William's entrails were burned before his dying eyes, adding the torment of smoke and flame to his already unbearable agony. The burning served both practical and symbolic purposes. It prevented the organs from being kept as relics by sympathizers, while also representing the purification of the realm through fire. The smoke rising from his burning organs was visible throughout London, a grim signal of royal vengeance. The crowds watching this horror were not passive observers, but active participants in a communal act of justice. Their presence legitimized the proceedings, while their reactions, ranging from fascination to revulsion, provided feedback that royal officials could use to gauge the effectiveness of the demonstration. The execution was as much a political event as a judicial one, requiring audience participation to achieve its goals. The sounds of William's suffering, combined with the smell of burning flesh and the sight of his dismemberment, created a sensory experience so overwhelming that many witnesses would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. This was precisely the intention, to create a trauma so profound it would serve as a permanent deterrent to anyone contemplating rebellion against royal authority. The final stage of William de Marisco's punishment involved the literal dismemberment of his body into 4 quarters, a process that gave the punishment its name. Using axes and knives, the executioner's assistants methodically separated William's limbs from his torso while he still clung to life. This quartering was both the culmination of his physical suffering and the beginning of his symbolic destruction. Each quarter of William's body was designated for display in different locations throughout the kingdom, ensuring that his punishment would serve as a warning far beyond London. His arms and legs were sent to major cities and towns, where they were displayed on prominent buildings or city gates. This distribution of his remains transformed William's body into a kingdom-wide advertisement of power and the consequences of defying it. William's head, considered the most significant part of his remains, was reserved for the highest honor of posthumous display, London Bridge. There, it would serve as a permanent reminder to all who entered the capital. The bridge was one of London's most prominent landmarks, guaranteeing that thousands of people would see William's severed head and remember the price of treason. His dead eyes would stare down at the city he had once terrorized, now serving as a warning to future rebels. The preservation and display of the body parts required considerable skill and planning. Medieval authorities had developed techniques for treating severed limbs and heads to ensure they remained visible for extended periods. Salt, tar, and other preservatives were used to prevent rapid decay, while iron spikes and wooden posts provided secure mounting points for the grisly displays. The immediate aftermath of William de Marisco's execution saw his name transformed from that of a defiant rebel to a cautionary tale told throughout England. Parents used his story to warn children about the consequences of defying authority, while political leaders cited his fate when dealing with potential troublemakers. His death had achieved exactly what Henry III intended: the creation of a permanent deterrent through institutionalized terror. The chroniclers of the time recorded William's execution in meticulous detail, ensuring that future generations would understand both the nature of his crimes and the severity of his punishment. These written accounts served as permanent reminders of royal power preserved in monasteries and royal archives, where they could be consulted whenever similar lessons needed to be taught. The written record was as important as the physical spectacle in maintaining the execution's deterrent effect. The display of William's remains throughout the kingdom created a network of physical reminders that reinforced the lessons of his execution. Travelers moving between cities would encounter his severed limbs and be reminded of royal authority and the consequences of rebellion. These displays served as a form of political communication, broadcasting royal power to illiterate populations who might not otherwise receive such messages. The psychological impact of William's execution extended far beyond its immediate witnesses. Stories of his suffering spread throughout England and beyond, creating a reputation for English justice that combined admiration for its efficiency with horror at its brutality. Foreign visitors to London would often specifically seek out the sight of his head on London Bridge, carrying tales of English ruthlessness back to their home countries. The execution of William de Marisco marked a significant moment in the evolution of English judicial practice. His punishment represented one of the earliest recorded uses of the full hanging, drawing, and quartering sentence that would become the standard punishment for treason in England for centuries to come. Later victims of this sentence would endure suffering according to the precedent established by William's death, making him an unwitting pioneer of judicial brutality. The legal and procedural innovations developed for William's execution were carefully documented and incorporated into English common law. Future cases of treason referenced his punishment as the appropriate standard, establishing a legal precedent that would claim thousands of lives over the following centuries. The judicial machinery of death that destroyed William became a permanent part of the English legal system. The political effectiveness of William's punishment encouraged other medieval rulers to adopt similar practices. They recognized the value of public executions as a tool not only for punishing individuals, but also for maintaining social order through fear and spectacle. William de Marisco's execution served as a template, a benchmark for demonstrating the consequences of defying authority and the lengths to which rulers would go to protect their power. In essence, William's death transcended mere retribution. It became a carefully orchestrated political message, a warning to the population that rebellion would not be tolerated, and a testament to the Crown's capacity for calculated terror. By combining physical suffering, theatrical display, and widespread dissemination of the punishment's results, Henry III and his officials ensured that William de Marisco's name would echo through history. The execution cemented his legacy as both a pirate of notorious renown and a cautionary example of what happens when audacity meets the relentless machinery of royal justice. Even centuries later, the execution of William de Marisco is referenced as a defining moment in medieval English jurisprudence. Scholars examine the methods used to convey authority, the integration of spectacle into punishment, and the psychological tactics employed to maintain. The spectacle of hanging, drawing, and quartering quickly spread throughout Europe as monarchs sought to emulate Henry III's success in deterring rebellion through fear. William's death thus contributed to a broader escalation in the cruelty of medieval justice systems across the continent. The symbolic power of his execution also shaped the development of royal ceremonial and state pageantry. The meticulously choreographed nature of his death became a model for other public spectacles, demonstrating how events could be used to communicate political messages and reinforce social hierarchies. Lessons from his execution were later applied to coronations, royal entries, and other formal state occasions. Medieval chroniclers struggled to find language adequate enough to convey the horror of William de Marisco's punishment, often relying on religious imagery and classical references to communicate the extent of his suffering. Their accounts reveal a complex mixture of admiration for the effectiveness of royal justice and revulsion at its methods. These records preserve not only the facts of his death, but also contemporary reactions to the spectacle. The theological implications of William's punishment were debated by scholars and clergy who wrestled with reconciling the brutality of his execution with Christian teachings on mercy and forgiveness. Some argued that his crimes justified exceptional punishment, while others questioned whether any human authority could rightly inflict such suffering. These debates reflected the broader tension between secular and religious power in medieval society. The impact of William's execution on popular culture was immediate and enduring. Ballads and tales of his life and death circulated across England, emphasizing the horror of his punishment while occasionally romanticizing his earlier exploits as a pirate. These narratives spread knowledge of his fate while also serving as entertainment, showing how even the most brutal events could be transformed into cultural stories. Artistic depictions in manuscript illuminations and later woodcuts reveal how medieval artists grappled with representing such extreme violence while still maintaining a moral message that his punishment was deserved. Many images emphasized the ceremonial aspects of the execution while minimizing gore, suggesting that contemporary audiences found the reality of his death difficult to confront directly. William de Marisco's story forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about political power and the lengths authorities will go to maintain control. His execution was not merely an act of brutality, but a calculated use of terror as governance, a practice that resonates in various forms throughout history. The methodical nature of his suffering demonstrates how violence can be systematized and bureaucratized into state policy. The efficiency with which he was captured, tried, and executed reflects the sophistication of medieval state power when fully exercised. Contrary to popular notions of the Middle Ages as chaotic, William's fate reveals a coordinated government capable of deliberate and highly organized action against perceived threats. The public's reaction to William's execution, from fascination to horror, highlights the complex interplay between authority and spectacle. The crowds that witnessed his dismemberment were participating in political theater, reinforcing their submission to royal power while satisfying their curiosity and desire for spectacle. This combination of politics and performance remains a potent tool for governance even today. The lasting consequences of William de Marisco's execution extended well beyond his death, establishing practices that would claim countless lives in the centuries to follow. His punishment became a template for state violence, refined over time, illustrating how individual tragedies can evolve into institutionalized systems of oppression. The machinery of death that destroyed William endured long after his passing, continuing to serve royal authority even as his name faded from common memory. Ultimately, his execution stands as a chilling testament to the ways power asserts itself through fear and theatricality. His transformation from living rebel to dismembered warning represents the ultimate expression of authority, not merely to kill, but to annihilate so completely that death itself becomes a political message. His scattered remains, displayed throughout the kingdom like macabre signposts, communicated a clear warning. This is the fate of those who defy the crown. The horror of William's death was no incidental byproduct of medieval justice. It was its entire purpose.